When Henry passed, the house went quiet in a way I hadn't known possible. Not the ordinary kind of quiet that fills a room after the television is turned off or the kettle finishes whistling, but a kind of hollow silence, like the air itself had forgotten how to move. I kept expecting his footsteps in the hallway, his throat clearing before he spoke, the scrape of his chair at breakfast. But there was nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the clock ticking like it was keeping time for someone else. It took me 3 months before I could open his closet. For before I stopped setting 2 plates at the table. I told everyone I was fine, that grief was just a kind of weather, you wait it out, you learn to walk in the rain. But the truth was, I'd built my whole life around Henry, and when he left, the map disappeared with him. He was a quiet man, my Henry. Not the romantic type, not with words, at least. His love showed up in the small, consistent ways, the porch light always left on for me, the coffee ready before sunrise, the way he fixed things without ever being asked. I thought I knew everything there was to know about him. 42 years of marriage leaves little room for secrets, or so I believed. That day started like most others since the funeral. I woke early, though there was no reason to, folded the sheets, made tea, and tried not to think too much. The sun was thin through the curtains, the kind that barely warms your skin. I decided to start clearing out the attic, something I'd avoided for months. Maybe I thought that by sorting through his things, I'd sort through my heart too. The attic was exactly as he'd left it, neat, labeled boxes, tools lined up like soldiers. There was a box marked Christmas, another taxes 1998 to 2010, and one simply labeled keepsakes. I sat cross-legged on the floor, brushing dust from the lids, opening each carefully as if the contents might shatter. Photos, letters from our early years, a pressed flower from the first bouquet he ever gave me, tiny fragments of a life shared. But the strange thing was, under all the boxes, tucked far back beneath the old cedar chest, I noticed a corner of something I'd never seen before. The edge of a smaller box, wooden, painted dark green, half hidden by a stack of folded blankets. It wasn't labeled. I tried to remember if Henry had ever mentioned it, but nothing came to mind. It took effort to pull it out. The box was heavier than it looked, about the size of a shoebox, with a tarnished brass clasp. There was no lock, just a bit of old ribbon tied around it, faded blue, fraying at the ends. My first instinct was to close the attic door and leave it there. It felt private, sacred in a way I couldn't explain. But curiosity has its own gravity. I brought the box downstairs, set it on the kitchen table, and made another cup of tea. I stared at it for a long time before I finally untied the ribbon. Inside, everything was carefully arranged, almost too carefully. A folded envelope on top, yellowed with age, addressed to Eleanor, for when you're ready. My name, written in Henry's unmistakable handwriting. I didn't open it immediately. My hands trembled just looking at it. Beneath the envelope were items I didn't recognize, an old photograph of a young woman standing by a river, her face turned away, a small silver key, and a hospital bracelet with a date from 1976, the year before we married. My chest tightened. 1976, that was the year Henry moved from Chicago to Bellevue, where we met. He'd always said he came here for a job opportunity. But what was this? The photo wasn't of me. The bracelet didn't belong to me. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't notice. I just kept looking at the items, afraid to touch them, afraid not to. I finally picked up the photograph again. The woman was wearing a floral dress, her hair pinned loosely. Something about the curve of her shoulders felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. The background, an arched bridge, a riverbank, looked like the park downtown, though it was impossible to be sure after all these years. The silver key was small, ornate, the kind you'd expect to fit an old jewelry box or a diary. I turned it over in my hand. There were tiny initials engraved along the stem, MR? I whispered it out loud, as if saying it might unlock something in my memory. But nothing came. The hospital bracelet had faded ink, the patient name almost illegible except for a few letters, Mar, and what looked like an N. A birth date. March 3, 1976. My throat felt tight. Someone had been born that day. I reached for the envelope next. The paper was brittle, soft from years of waiting. I hesitated, then unfolded it carefully. Henry's handwriting flowed across the page, steady, deliberate, just like him. My dearest Eleanor. If you found this, then I'm no longer there to explain it myself. I should have told you long ago, but I couldn't find the courage without risking everything we built. I hope, when you read this, you'll understand that silence wasn't deceit, it was fear. The kind of fear that comes from knowing the truth might change the way you see me. I stopped reading. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The words felt heavy, like stones in my chest. I took a deep breath and kept going. Before I met you, there was someone else. Her name was Margaret. We were young, foolish, and the world felt small back then. She became pregnant, and we planned to marry. But she disappeared before the baby was born. I looked for her for months. Years, even. Then I learned she'd moved away, no forwarding address. When I met you, I told myself that chapter was closed. I never found her, or the child. The letter went on, each line pulling me deeper into a life I hadn't known existed. When we married, I wanted to tell you. I came close a dozen times. But every time I saw your kindness, your trust, I couldn't bear to risk losing it. I didn't keep the box to hide her, I kept it to remind myself of the life I almost had, and the life I was blessed to have with you instead. By the time I reached the last line, my tears had blurred the ink. Forgive me for what I didn't say. Some silences are born from love, not lies. Henry. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, my tea untouched, the morning sun creeping across the table. 42 years of marriage, and I'd never known this man fully. The revelation didn't feel like betrayal, not exactly. It felt like standing in front of a painting I'd seen 1,000 times and suddenly noticing a new color that had always been there, just hidden beneath the light. Still, I couldn't shake the ache in my chest. Who was Margaret? And what had happened to the child? I looked again at the photograph, the woman by the river, and felt a strange pull. The way she stood, the tilt of her head. It wasn't just familiarity. It was something deeper, like memory trying to surface. I turned the photo over. On the back, written faintly in pencil, were 4 words, for our daughter, someday. The air left my lungs. Our daughter. The photo slipped from my hand and landed face down on the table. I didn't move for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked, the hum of the refrigerator filled the space where thought should have been, but I was somewhere else entirely, between disbelief and a strange, aching clarity. Our daughter. The words kept circling in my head like restless birds. I read the back of the photograph again, tracing the faint pencil marks with my finger. For our daughter, someday. My pulse quickened. If Henry had a child before me, where was she? Was she alive? Did she know he existed? Did she know I existed? I tried to remember 1976. We'd met the following spring, at a library fundraiser, where Henry was repairing an old book press and I was sorting donated paperbacks. He was steady, kind, a little shy. There had been no sign of sorrow or secrets. But maybe that was the point, he'd buried them deep enough that even grief couldn't find them. I picked up the silver key again, turning it in the light. Margaret something. Maybe Margaret Rivers? Rowan? I wasn't sure why my mind wanted to give her a last name. Maybe because unfinished things demand completion. That night, I didn't sleep. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and reread the letter until I knew every word by heart. I tried to be angry, but anger wouldn't come. Instead, there was an odd tenderness, grief layered over compassion. He hadn't betrayed me in action, only in silence. And even that silence had been carved from fear, not cruelty. Still, I couldn't leave it alone. I needed to know. Needed to understand what kind of life Henry had left unfinished. The next morning, I took the photograph and the bracelet to the library, the same one where I'd worked for 30 years before retiring. The staff still knew me well enough to let me use the archives room. I began searching local hospital records, births from March 1976. There weren't many digital entries that old, but a few scanned documents popped up. Names, dates, mothers listed. I looked for anything close to Margaret. 3 pages in, there it was. Patient, Margaret Rowan. Child, female, unnamed. Born March 3, 1976. Mother discharged April 2. No father listed. The name hit like a whisper through time. Rowan. The initials on the key. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the computer screen painting pale light across my hands. Henry hadn't lied. There had been a Margaret. There had been a child. But what happened to them? The next lead came unexpectedly. At the bottom of the hospital record was a note, transferred to St. Mary's Home, Bellevue. My breath caught. St. Mary's, an old charity home for single mothers, closed down decades ago. I remembered it vaguely, a brick building near the river that had been converted into condos years ago. I drove there that same afternoon. The building looked different, sleek glass windows where Ivy used to climb, but I recognized the curve of the old stone steps. There was a small historical plaque near the entrance. I read it aloud softly, founded 1948. St. Mary's Home for Women and Children. A place of refuge and new beginnings. The plaque included a black and white photograph of the original building, women on the steps, nurses in crisp uniforms, children playing in the courtyard. And there, in the far right corner, a young woman with a baby in her arms. The image was grainy, but I felt it in my bones, it was her. The same posture, the same curve of the neck as the woman in the river photo. Margaret. I touched the glass covering the plaque. Who were you? I whispered. Back home, I pulled out the box again. I hadn't noticed it before, but underneath the hospital bracelet was a folded slip of paper, tucked into the lining. My fingers shook as I unfolded it. It was a receipt, from Bellevue Storage, Unit 14B. Dated 1982. My breath caught. Henry's handwriting was on the back, if needed, key enclosed. I looked at the silver key in my hand. My heart began to race. The next morning, I drove across town to Bellevue Storage. The sign was faded, the office small and half empty. A young man behind the counter looked up as I entered. Can I help you, ma'am? Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm looking for information on Unit 14B. The records might go back a few decades. He frowned, typing into the computer. That's old. We've switched systems a few times. But, he paused, scanning the screen. You're in luck. 14BS still listed as active. Paid in full, too. Automatic renewal. My stomach turned. By whom? He checked the file. Henry Moore. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Can I access it? I asked quietly. Are you Mrs. Moore? Yes. He hesitated, then nodded. If your name's on the account, you'll need ID. And the key, if there's a lock. I handed both over, the ID and the small silver key. He gave me a nod toward the hallway. End of the third row. The corridor smelled of dust and old metal. I found 14B easily, the number half rusted, the padlock small and dull with age. My fingers trembled as I fit the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as though it had been waiting. Inside, the unit was small, barely larger than a closet. One shelf, one box. Nothing else. The box was wooden, lighter than the one I'd found under the bed, but crafted in the same style, polished corners, careful design. Henry's handiwork, I realized. I opened it. Inside was a bundle of papers, tied with the same blue ribbon. Beneath it, a single photograph, Henry, younger by decades, holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. The expression on his face, unmistakable love, pride, sorrow. Written on the back, in Margaret's handwriting, for when she asks who he was. I pressed the photo to my chest, tears blurring the edges. He had found them. He must have. But then why didn't he tell me? I untied the ribbon and opened the papers. They were letters, unsent, yellowed, written by Henry. Each one addressed to the same name, Emily. My dearest Emily, one began, I don't know where to start, except to say I'm sorry for being a ghost. I've watched from far away, through the few traces Margaret left behind. You were two the last time I saw you. I carried your photograph in my wallet for years, until the ink faded. I told myself I'd find the courage to reach out, but life built its walls, and I couldn't risk them falling on the people I loved. There were more letters, dozens each one written over years. One from 1989, you'd be 13 now. I hope you like books. Your mother loved the river. I wonder if you do too. Another from 1999, you're 23 today. I sometimes see girls your age at the library and wonder if you ever passed me on the street. If I'd have known it was you, would I have known what to say? The most recent was dated just a few months before he died. You're 47 now. I have less time than I once did. I've written to you all these years, though I never knew if I'd have the chance to send them. If someone finds this box, I hope they do what I couldn't, deliver it. My tears fell freely then. Henry hadn't just remembered her, he'd loved her, carried her in silence for decades. At the bottom of the box was an old address label, faded but legible. Emily Rowan, 14, Orchard Lane, Cedarbrook. I sat back on my heels, the photograph trembling in my hands. The air in the storage room felt thick. 47 years. If she was alive, she'd be nearly 50 now. I whispered her name like a prayer. Emily. And then, softly, almost without thinking, I'll find you. I didn't go to sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph, Henry's younger face, the baby cradled in his arms, that unmistakable look of quiet devotion. It wasn't the face of a liar. It was the face of a man who had loved too deeply and lost too completely to ever speak of it again. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I would find Emily Rowan, if only to give her the letters. Not to make sense of it, not even to justify Henry's choices, but because I couldn't let his silence be the end of her story. I packed the box carefully, wrapping it in a soft cloth. My reflection in the hallway mirror startled me, tired eyes, but determined. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt purpose. Cedarbrook was only an hour's drive north, a small town with more trees than people. As I turned off the highway, the world seemed to soften, the kind of place where mailboxes were hand-painted, and the air smelled faintly of pine and bread. I found Orchard Lane easily enough, a quiet street lined with narrow houses and worn picket fences. Number 14 looked ordinary. White siding, blue shutters, wind chimes by the door. A car in the driveway with a dented fender. I parked across the street, clutching the photograph in my lap like a compass. What was I supposed to say? Hello, I'm the widow of the man who might be your father? The thought almost made me laugh, except my throat was too tight. I almost turned the car around. But then the front door opened. A woman stepped out, balancing a mug and a phone. Her hair was silver-streaked, cut short. She moved with quiet confidence, the way women do when they've had to hold their own for a long time. I watched as she walked down the driveway to collect the newspaper. When she bent to pick it up, the light hit her face, and my breath caught. It was like seeing an echo. The slope of her cheek, the tilt of her brow, it was Henry. Not exactly, but enough that my heart stumbled. Before I could lose my nerve, I got out of the car. The gravel crunched under my shoes. She looked up, surprised but not alarmed. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was warm but cautious. I held the photograph like a fragile thing. "My name is Eleanor Moore," I said softly. I think you knew my husband. Henry Moore." She frowned slightly, searching my face. "I don't think so." "I'm sorry." "Maybe not," I said. "But I think he knew you." I handed her the photo. She took it carefully, eyes narrowing as she studied it. I saw the moment recognition hit, her lips parted, her hand went still. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "He kept it," I said. "All his life. Along with letters. Dozens of them. To you." She looked up then, eyes wide. "To me? Your name is Emily Rowan, isn't it?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes. But I don't understand." "Neither did I admitted. Until I found a box under our bed after he passed." We stood there for a long moment, the air between us thick with everything unspoken. Finally, she said, "Would you like to come in?" Her house smelled faintly of cinnamon and paint, lived in, loved, but lonely in its corners. She gestured toward the kitchen. We sat across from each other at the table, the same way Henry and I had for 40 years, and I set the box between us. She didn't touch it right away. Her hands were steady, but her voice trembled. "My mother told me once," she said quietly, "that my father died before I was born. She never said his name. Only that he was kind, and that it hurt too much to talk about him." I swallowed hard. "He thought you both disappeared. He looked for you." She stared at the box. "All this time?" I nodded. "He wrote you letters every year." "He never sent them." "But he kept them." "Every one." Emily reached for the ribbon, untied it with careful fingers. The papers unfolded like breath returning. She began to read, silently at first, then aloud, just a few lines, her voice breaking halfway through. "You'd be 13 now. I hope you like books." She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. He remembered." "He did," I said softly. "Every day." She looked at me then, really looked. "You stayed with him all those years. You must hate me." The question startled me. "No," I said immediately. "How could I?" "You were never his betrayal. You were his beginning." Emily let out a shaky laugh that sounded half like a sob. "I used to dream about him. Not what he looked like, but who he might have been. I always imagined he'd forgotten. That I was some mistake he wanted to erase." I shook my head. "He never forgot. He just couldn't bridge the past and the life we built. Maybe he thought protecting one meant abandoning the other." She nodded slowly, eyes distant. "That sounds like something my mother would have done too. Protect everyone, even if it meant breaking herself." For a long time, we sat in silence. She read a few more letters. I watched the tears slip down her cheeks, silent, unashamed. There was something strangely holy about the moment. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. Softer. Sadder. But lighter somehow, too. "Thank you," she whispered. "For finding me. For bringing this." "I think he wanted me to," I said. "He just didn't know how to ask." She smiled faintly. Maybe this was how. We talked for hours. She told me about her life, 2 grown sons, both married, a small art studio she ran from her garage. She'd never left Cedarbrook. "Funny, isn't it?" she said with a wry smile. All this time, he was just an hour away. I smiled back, though my chest ached. Sometimes distance isn't measured in miles. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. "You can come back," she said quietly. "If you'd like. There are more letters to read." "I'd like that." On the drive home, the world outside the windshield looked different. The sky seemed wider, the light softer. For years, I'd thought Henry's story ended with me. But now I understood, it continued, quietly, in someone else's heart. That night, I sat at our kitchen table again, the first box beside me. I reread his letter, the one that began "For when you're ready." And for the first time, I think I was. I took out my own stationery and began to write. "Dear Henry," I began, "I met her. She looks like you, but laughs like someone who's had to build her joy from pieces. She forgave you before I even finished explaining. Maybe that's your real legacy, not silence, but forgiveness that grows even in its shadow." I paused, smiling faintly through tears. "You always said love was about what we build together. I think you were right. But sometimes love is also what we rebuild after loss. I hope wherever you are, you can see that." When I finished, I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into the same box where his had been, and tied it with the blue ribbon. Not as an ending, but as a continuation. For the first time in months, I slept. Not dreamlessly, but peacefully. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, warm and patient. I brewed coffee for one, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. A week passed before I went back to Cedarbrook. I told myself it was to bring Emily more of Henry's letters, but the truth was, I wanted to see her again. There was something unfinished between us, a thread that had been pulled loose but hadn't yet found where it belonged. When she opened the door, she smiled like she'd been expecting me. "I made tea," she said. "Chamomile. I thought it might suit the day." The house felt softer this time. There were flowers on the table, music playing faintly from another room. She'd framed the photograph of Henry holding her as a baby. It sat on a shelf near the window, sunlight catching the glass. "I keep looking at it," she said when she saw me notice. Trying to imagine what he was thinking in that moment. Maybe that he'd found something too good to keep. I set the letters on the table. "He never stopped thinking about you, Emily. I think he carried you in every quiet thing he did." She nodded. "I believe that now." We spent the afternoon going through the letters together. Some were light-hearted, Henry writing about fixing the porch swing, about how I'd burn toast even with a timer. Others were heavy, filled with regret and tenderness. As she read, Emily would pause now and then, smiling or wiping a tear. "This one," she said softly, holding a letter dated 2005, "it feels like he wrote it just for me." She read aloud, voice trembling. "If I could tell you anything, it would be this: don't let silence become your inheritance. Speak even when it shakes you. Tell the people you love that you love them before time steals the chance." When she finished, she looked up at me. "I think he'd want you to hear that too." I laughed quietly, though my eyes stung. Maybe he wrote it for both of us. Outside, the sky was changing, late afternoon light turning gold. Emily stood and walked to a small cabinet by the wall. She opened it and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I want to show you something," she said. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished but elegant. She opened it gently. Inside was the same photograph, Henry holding her as a baby, but folded smaller, creased from years of being carried. "My mother gave this to me when I turned 18, she said. She told me to keep it close, even when I didn't understand why. I never knew where it came from. Until now." I reached out, touching the edge of the locket. "He would have been grateful you kept it." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I never could throw it away." We sat quietly after that. There wasn't much left to say. The space between us didn't feel like strangers anymore, it felt like family, not by blood, but by shared truth. When I finally stood to leave, Emily hugged me tightly. "You gave me back a piece of my life I didn't know was missing," she whispered. I held her just as firmly. "And you gave meaning to the part of Henry the first could never reach." Driving home, the sun was setting over the highway, painting the sky in long strokes of amber and violet. I thought about Henry, about the choices that shape us, the fears that silence us, and the small mercies that find us anyway. I realized that for all his secrets, his love had been real, imperfect, human, but real. When I reached home, I placed the first box, the one I'd found under the bed, back where it had been. Not hidden, but resting. Then I took out my blue notebook. I'd bought it years ago for grocery lists, but lately, it had become something else. A place for truths. On the first blank page, I wrote, "One day, grief becomes less about what you've lost and more about what you found in its quiet aftermath." I closed the notebook and looked around the kitchen. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the air had learned to breathe again. The following morning, I received a letter in the mail, no return address, just neat handwriting on a cream envelope. Inside was a short note. "Dear Eleanor, I've been thinking about our conversation and about him. I want you to know that I'm grateful, not just for the letters, but for you. You carried his silence with grace, and now you've shared it with gentleness. That's more courage than most people ever find. I'm visiting his grave next week. If you'd like to come, I think it would mean something to him, to both of us. With love, Emily." I folded the note carefully, tucking it into the blue notebook. Then, for reasons I couldn't quite explain, I went to the garden. The roses Henry had planted years ago were blooming again, pale yellow, his favorite. I cut 2 of them and placed them in a small vase. A week later, I met Emily at the cemetery. The day was bright but quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like permission. We stood together by the headstone. She knelt first, laying a single white rose against the stone. "Thank you," she whispered. "For trying. Even when you couldn't finish." I placed my rose beside hers. "For loving us both," I said softly. We stood there for a while, the breeze gentle, the trees rustling above us like an old hymn. There were no tears this time, just calm understanding. As we walked back toward the car, Emily said, "It's strange. I spent my life wondering who I came from, and now I feel like I finally know who I belong to." "You belong to yourself," I said with a smile. "That's what he'd want you to know." She nodded, eyes glistening. "And you? What about you, Eleanor? What do you want now?" I thought for a moment. "To keep living," I said simply. "Not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, just as me." That made her smile. Then maybe we both found something after all. We parted with a quiet hug, no promises, no grand words, just an understanding that connection doesn't always need definition. That evening, back home, I made soup. The same way Henry liked it, too much thyme, not enough salt. I poured a glass of water, set the table for one, and smiled. After dinner, I opened the window. The night air drifted in, cool and kind. I took out the blue notebook again and wrote one final line. "Sometimes the past doesn't haunt us, it waits patiently until we're ready to make peace with it." I closed the notebook, set it beside the vase of roses, and turned off the lights. The house wasn't silent anymore. It was still, but alive, in its own gentle way. Upstairs, before bed, I glanced once more under the frame. The space where the box had been was empty, but not hollow. Just waiting, perhaps, for the next truth time would someday deliver. I whispered into the darkness, "Good night, Henry." The wind answered softly through the curtains, carrying with it something that almost sounded like peace.